The first thing Caleb Whitmore noticed was not the open door. It was the silence behind it. At 3:17 in the morning, the 47th floor of Bellamy Tower was usually a place where even the elevators seemed tired. The executives were gone. The phones were asleep. The polished glass walls reflected only the slow movement of the night cleaning crew. Caleb had worked those empty hours for 6 years, long enough to know every sound in the building. The hum of the ventilation system, the clicking pipe near the west hallway, the soft rattle of the old supply closet door. But this sound was different. A quiet voice coming from a room that was supposed to be locked. Caleb stopped pushing his cleaning cart. He looked at the small picture taped near the handle, the one that said executive access only. Most people would have walked away. Most people would have decided it was none of their business. Caleb had spent years learning that sometimes doing the right thing meant knowing when to step back. But then he heard something that made his hand tighten around the handle of his cart. A woman's voice. A voice he recognized from every business magazine in the lobby. Adriana Bellamy, the CEO who had built one of the fastest-growing medical technology companies in America. The woman whose face appeared on conference stages and magazine covers. The woman who everyone believed had never made a mistake she could not fix. Caleb slowly opened the door just enough to see inside. He was not searching for trouble. He was looking for a problem he was hired to solve. A leaking pipe. A broken light. A safety issue. That was all. But the room beyond the doorway was not what he expected. On the table sat an old brown folder, a small silver recorder, and a photograph that looked like it had been hidden away for years. Adriana stood with her back turned, holding a piece of paper with shaking hands. "If anyone finds this, everything I built will come apart," she whispered. Caleb immediately looked away. He lowered his eyes, the same way he did when he walked past private conversations in the hallway. His mother had taught him something when he was a child. A person's struggle did not become your entertainment just because you discovered it. He reached for the door to leave. Then the recorder on the table suddenly clicked on. A man's voice filled the room. "You promised my family the truth would come out." Caleb froze. He did not know the man speaking. He did not know what happened years ago, but he knew the sound of someone who had been ignored for too long. The next words were quieter. "You can't erase what happened to Daniel Reeves." Caleb looked back at the photograph. A young man he had never seen before stared back at him. A name he had never heard suddenly felt important. Before he could understand why, the lights in the hallway flickered. The security system on the floor restarted with a sharp electronic beep. Adriana turned around. For the first time that night, she saw him. The man standing in the doorway. The man who was never supposed to be there. Her expression changed instantly, not with anger, but with fear. Because the one person who had discovered her secret was not a rival, not a reporter, not someone powerful enough to threaten her. It was the night janitor everyone in the building walked past without remembering his name. Caleb did not move when Adriana Bellamy looked at him. He had spent enough years cleaning offices after midnight to understand that people revealed the most when they believed nobody was watching. But this was different. This was a room where he did not belong, a conversation he was never meant to hear, and a secret that clearly had the power to change someone's life. He slowly stepped back and reached for the door. "I am sorry, Ms. Bellamy. I was checking the hallway because the security panel reset. I did not mean to interrupt anything." His voice was calm, almost apologetic, the same tone he used when fixing a mistake that was not his. Adriana stared at him for several seconds. She was a woman who negotiated million-dollar contracts without blinking, but now her fingers tightened around the old piece of paper in her hand. Why was she more afraid of a janitor seeing the truth than a competitor discovering it? Caleb noticed something else before he left. The photograph on the table had been turned face down, but not before he saw the corner. A young man standing beside a woman who looked much younger than Adriana. A company logo was visible behind them. Bellamy Medical, the company she built. The company everyone believed started with one brilliant idea from one determined woman. Caleb pushed the door almost closed, but Adriana spoke. "Wait." He stopped. Not because she was the CEO. Not because she had authority over his job. He stopped because her voice sounded like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time. "Did you see anything?" she asked. It was a simple question, but Caleb understood there was another question hiding underneath it. "Could you destroy me with what you know?" He looked at the floor for a moment before answering. "I saw a room that was supposed to be locked. I saw someone who looked worried. That is all." Adriana studied him carefully. Most people tried to impress her. They wanted opportunities, connections, approval. Caleb wanted nothing from her. That seemed to make him harder for her to understand. "You should forget what happened tonight," she said quietly. Caleb nodded once. "People forget many things, Ms. Bellamy. Usually the things that are easiest to ignore." Then he walked away. But the next morning, forgetting became impossible. Caleb arrived home at 7:05 after his shift. His small apartment was quiet except for the sound of his daughter, Naomi, preparing for school in the kitchen. She was 12 years old and had developed the habit of leaving handwritten notes beside his coffee mug. That morning's note had only one sentence. "Dad, remember you promised to come to my science presentation." Caleb smiled, folded the paper carefully, and placed it in his wallet. He had missed enough moments in life. He refused to miss another one. But before he could leave for sleep, his phone rang. It was the building supervisor. "Caleb, did you enter the executive conference room last night?" The question immediately changed the air around him. He looked toward the kitchen where Naomi was packing her backpack. "Why are you asking?" The supervisor hesitated. "Because someone reported that a confidential file may have been accessed." Caleb looked at the small note in his hand. A normal morning had turned into something else. But the question that bothered him was not whether he was in trouble. It was who reported him. Because if Adriana Bellamy wanted to protect her secret, why was Caleb the one being investigated instead of the person who left the secret sitting in an unlocked room? And when Caleb opened his work email, he saw an attachment from an unknown sender. One photograph, one name, Daniel Reeves, and one message underneath. "You were not the first person to find the truth." The email from the unknown sender stayed open on Caleb Whitmore's screen for almost a full minute before he closed it. He could have forwarded it to his supervisor. He could have saved a copy and protected himself. He could have used the information to prove that he was not just a night janitor caught in someone else's problem. But instead, he deleted the message from his work account and kept the photograph hidden in his personal phone. The reason was simple. The picture was not just evidence. It was connected to a person. And Caleb knew what happened when people became only pieces of information. They stopped being treated like human beings. That lesson had followed him since the day he became a single father. At 8:30 that morning, Caleb was standing inside the lobby of Bellamy Tower while his supervisor reviewed the security report. The man in charge, Harold Bennett, was not angry. That almost made it worse. He spoke carefully, the way people spoke when they were trying to avoid saying something they already believed. "Caleb, I know you have worked here a long time, but executive areas are different. If something is missing, people will ask questions." Caleb looked at the polished marble floor beneath his shoes. "I understand." He did not argue. He did not mention the CEO's name. He did not explain that he had walked away from something that could have protected him because he believed someone else deserved a chance to tell the truth first. That choice cost him. By noon, his supervisor informed him that he was temporarily removed from the executive floor until the investigation was complete. The one assignment that paid the extra hours he used to cover Naomi's school expenses was gone. Caleb simply nodded and handed over his access card. But someone else noticed. A young security guard named Luis Carter watched from the front desk. He had seen employees panic when their jobs were threatened. He had seen people blame others to save themselves. Caleb did the opposite. He accepted the consequence without revealing what he knew. Why would a man with nothing to gain choose silence? That question stayed with Luis long after Caleb walked away. Later that afternoon, Adriana Bellamy reviewed the security report from her private office. She expected to see a problem. Instead, she saw something she did not understand. The footage showed Caleb entering the room. It showed him standing near the evidence. It showed him leaving without touching anything. But what bothered her was not what he did. It was what he refused to do. Most people who found a weakness in a powerful person tried to use it. Caleb had discovered something that could have given him leverage, and he had walked away. Adriana looked again at the image from the hallway camera. A man carrying a cleaning cart. A man nobody in the building remembered. A man who had somehow shown more restraint than many executives she had worked with. Then her assistant placed an old company file on her desk. "We found the name you asked about," the assistant said. Adriana opened the folder slowly. Inside was the same photograph Caleb had seen. But there was something new. A handwritten note attached to the back. The handwriting belonged to someone she had not heard from in 15 years. Adriana read the name and immediately stood up. Daniel Reeves. But underneath his name was another sentence that changed everything. Caleb Whitmore was not a stranger to this story. The next morning, Caleb Whitmore arrived at Bellamy Tower expecting another conversation about his suspension. Instead, he found his employee badge already waiting on the security desk. It was placed inside a small envelope with his name written across the front. Caleb opened it slowly, expecting paperwork. What he found was a notice stating that his access to the building was under review due to a potential breach of confidential information. The words were professional. The meaning was clear. Someone had decided that the easiest way to protect a secret was to make the person who discovered it look suspicious. Caleb folded the paper carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket. He did not call Naomi's school. He did not tell his daughter that the extra shifts helping pay for her science program might disappear. When Naomi asked why he came home earlier than usual, Caleb simply smiled and said, "Some things change for a little while. We adjust." But that answer created a question he could not ignore. How long could a man keep protecting other people when doing so placed his own family at risk? Across town, Adriana Bellamy sat in a conference room surrounded by people who had spent years helping her build an empire. The difference was that today nobody was talking about growth. They were talking about damage control. Her legal advisor placed a copy of the recovered file on the table. If this information becomes public, the board will ask questions. Adriana looked at the old document. It was not just a file. It was a reminder of the one decision she had spent 15 years trying to bury. But before she could respond, another document appeared on the screen. A complaint had been filed against Caleb Whitmore. The accusation was not that he stole anything. It was worse. Someone claimed he had attempted to use private company information for personal advantage. Adriana stared at the report. She knew immediately it was false. She had seen his reaction. She had seen him leave without taking anything. So why was someone trying to destroy a man who had protected her secret? That question led her to investigate Caleb herself. She discovered things that surprised her. 6 years working nights. Never a disciplinary issue. Never a complaint. 2 years of unpaid weekend hours helping maintain the community center where his daughter attended classes. A supervisor's note mentioned something unusual. Caleb had once found an envelope containing several $1,000s left behind in an executive office. He returned it without hesitation. No. Reward requested. No recognition accepted. Adriana read that line twice. A man who could have used her mistake against her had spent years proving he would not take what did not belong to him. But then she found the detail that changed the entire situation. Caleb was not only connected to Daniel Reeves through a photograph. He was connected through a promise. 15 years earlier, before Bellamy Medical became a billion-dollar company, Daniel Reeves had been Caleb's co-worker at a small maintenance facility. They had both been invisible employees in a building where powerful people walked past them every day. Adriana felt the room become smaller. If Caleb knew Daniel, then he did not discover her secret by accident. He might have been the one person alive who understood the missing piece. Before she could call him, her phone rang. It was the building security director. His voice was tense. "Ms. Bellamy, there is something you need to know." Adriana stood up. "What happened?" A pause followed. The old archive room was accessed last night. Someone was looking for the original Daniel Reeves files. Her expression changed. Caleb had not been the only person searching for the truth. And whoever was looking had already found where the evidence was hidden. Adriana Bellamy arrived at Bellamy Tower before sunrise, but for the first time in years, she did not walk into the building like someone who owned it. She walked in like someone afraid of what waited inside. The archive room on the 47th floor had been opened overnight, yet nothing appeared stolen. The shelves were still organized. The old records were still there. Whoever entered had not come for money. They had come for one specific piece of the past. Adriana knew exactly which piece. Inside the locked cabinet was a folder she had never allowed anyone to mention. The Daniel Reeves file. She opened it with careful hands and found something unexpected. The original documents were still there, but one page was missing. Not destroyed. Not taken. Removed with precision. Someone knew exactly what they were searching for. Meanwhile, Caleb Whitmore sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. Beside him, Naomi was finishing her homework across from him, unaware that her father had spent the morning losing the job that helped keep their small apartment stable. Caleb watched her erase the same math problem 3 times before finally getting the answer. He smiled and pushed a piece of paper toward her. Sometimes the hardest part is not finding the answer. It is believing you are capable of finding it. Naomi looked at him and asked the question children often ask when they notice more than adults expect. Dad, are you worried? Caleb paused. He could have lied. He could have said everything was fine. Instead, he chose something different. I am figuring things out. It was not the whole truth, but it was honest. Later that day, Adriana found Caleb at the community center where he volunteered on weekends. She expected someone angry, someone looking for compensation, someone ready to use her mistake against her. Instead, she found him repairing a broken bookshelf while several children waited nearby with their books. Why did you not tell anyone what you saw? She asked. Caleb looked up. Because I did not know the whole story. That answer surprised her. Most people would have assumed the worst. Caleb placed the last screw into the shelf and tested it with his hand. Most people decide who someone is before they know what happened. Adriana looked around the room. She saw the same patience she had noticed in the security footage, the same quiet discipline. But then she asked the question she had been avoiding. Did you know Daniel Reeves? Caleb became still. Not dramatically, not like someone hiding guilt. More like someone opening a door he had kept closed for a long time. Yes. One word. But it changed everything. Caleb explained that Daniel was the first person who treated him like more than a worker nobody remembered. Years ago, when Caleb was struggling after becoming a single father, Daniel had helped him find stable work and reminded him that dignity was not something other people could give or take away. But Caleb stopped before explaining the full connection. Daniel believed the truth mattered, he said, even when telling it made life harder. Adriana looked away, because she remembered something Caleb did not know. Daniel had not simply left Bellamy Medical after the controversy. He had been offered a settlement and asked to stay silent. She had convinced herself it was the only way to protect the company, the only way to save thousands of employees. But now another question appeared. What if the decision that saved the company had destroyed the one person who deserved protection? Before Adriana could answer, her assistant rushed into the room holding a small envelope. We found this hidden behind the archive cabinet. Adriana opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten letter dated 15 years earlier. The first line made her lose her breath. Adriana, if you are reading this, it means Caleb finally found the truth you were afraid to face. Caleb stared at the letter. He had never seen it before, and neither had Adriana, because someone had been waiting all these years for the right person to discover it. The letter remained on the table between Caleb Whitmore and Adriana Bellamy for several seconds, untouched. Neither of them reached for it first. It was strange how a single piece of paper could make a room feel smaller. Finally, Adriana picked it up. Her eyes moved across the handwriting she had not seen in 15 years. And for the first time Caleb saw something he never expected from a woman known for controlling every room she entered. Uncertainty. The letter was not an accusation. It was not a threat. It was a record of what Daniel Reeves believed would happen if the truth was ever discovered. Daniel had written that the failure at Bellamy Medical was never caused by one person. The project had been rushed. The warnings had been ignored. Multiple executives had made decisions that created the problem. But when investors demanded someone take responsibility, Daniel had accepted the blame because Adriana promised him she would protect the truth later. She never did. Caleb looked at the pages again and realized something important. Daniel had not disappeared because he was guilty. He disappeared because he believed someone powerful would eventually admit what happened. But another detail changed the meaning of everything. Attached to the letter was a copy of an old meeting schedule. Daniel had marked one name. Not Adriana Bellamy. Not himself. Another executive. Richard Hale, the former chief financial officer who left the company shortly after Daniel's departure. The man who later became one of the largest investors in Bellamy Medical. Adriana stared at the name. He knew. Her voice was barely audible. Caleb watched her reaction carefully. This was not the reaction of someone protecting a secret anymore. It was the reaction of someone realizing the secret had been bigger than she understood. But before they could continue, Adriana's phone started ringing. It was her board chairman. The conversation lasted less than a minute. When she ended the call, her expression had changed again. They are calling an emergency board meeting. Caleb asked why. Adriana looked at the letter in her hand. Because someone leaked part of the story. The leak did not mention Daniel. It did not mention the missing evidence. It mentioned Caleb, a night janitor with access to confidential information. A company employee who allegedly discovered private documents and attempted to create a scandal. The same man who had spent years cleaning the offices of people who never learned his name was suddenly the easiest person to blame. Caleb listened quietly as Adriana explained. Then he did something she did not expect. He handed her the letter. "Keep this." Adriana looked confused. "You found this. It could protect you." Caleb shook his head. "It could protect the truth." "That is different." That answer stayed with her. Because she realized Caleb was not trying to win. He was trying to make sure the right thing happened, even if he was the one who suffered because of it. Later that evening, Adriana entered the boardroom carrying the letter, the photograph, and the original file. For years, people had believed her success came from always knowing the right move. But standing before the board, she finally understood that the hardest choice was the one she had avoided. She had to decide whether to protect the company she built or expose the people who helped build the lie. Then the doors opened. A lawyer walked in carrying a sealed envelope. He placed it on the table and looked directly at Adriana. "Before you say anything, you need to know something. The person who sent this evidence was not Daniel Reeves." Everyone became silent. The lawyer turned toward Caleb. "It was someone who has been watching you for years." Caleb looked at the envelope. His name was written on the front, and underneath it was a sentence that made his heart stop. "Your father asked me to wait until you were ready to know the truth." The sealed envelope with Caleb Whitmore's name on it sat in the middle of the boardroom table, untouched. For a moment, nobody spoke. The people around the table were used to controlling information, controlling conversations, controlling outcomes. But this was different. This envelope had arrived before they could decide what story the world would hear. Adriana Bellamy looked at Caleb. "You knew nothing about this?" Caleb shook his head. "No." The answer was simple, but the room reacted as if it carried more weight than a long explanation. Because everyone had spent the last 2 days asking what Caleb wanted from the situation. Nobody had asked what he might have lost. The lawyer opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter, an old employee badge, and a photograph of 2 men standing outside a small maintenance building 15 years earlier. One was Daniel Reeves. The other was a younger Caleb. The room became quiet. The image changed the way everyone looked at him. The man they had described as a security risk was not a stranger who discovered a secret. He was someone who had been connected to the story from the beginning. The lawyer explained that Caleb's father, Thomas Whitmore, had worked alongside Daniel before Caleb ever joined Bellamy Tower. Thomas had known the truth about what happened at Bellamy Medical, but he never released the information. Instead, he kept copies of the records because Daniel believed the truth would eventually matter. Caleb looked down at the old employee badge inside the envelope. It belonged to his father, a man who had spent his entire life working behind the scenes. "Hey." Caleb remembered coming home tired, but still making time to fix broken toys and help neighbors. Adriana watched Caleb closely. She expected anger. She expected questions. Instead, he quietly asked, "Why did my father wait?" The lawyer answered, "Because Daniel asked him to." He believed the truth would mean more if it came from someone who was willing to sacrifice something. That answer created another question. Why had Daniel chosen Caleb, a night janitor, instead of a lawyer, a journalist, or someone with power? Before anyone could answer, the board chairman interrupted. He reminded everyone that the company was facing a serious reputation crisis. The public story was already spreading. Investors were demanding answers. Employees were worried. Richard Hale, the former chief financial officer mentioned in Daniel's records, had released a statement claiming that old accusations were the work of disgruntled former employees. Adriana looked toward the screen displaying Richard's statement. For years, she had believed silence protected the company. Now she realized silence had protected the wrong people. But there was still one problem. The evidence was incomplete. The missing page from Daniel's original report contained the one signature that could prove who made the final decision 15 years ago. Without it, Richard Hale could deny everything. Caleb looked at the documents again. Something about the handwriting on Daniel's letter bothered him. He had seen it before. Not recently. Years earlier. He reached into his wallet and pulled out the small note Naomi had written him that morning. He looked at the handwriting on the paper, then back at Daniel's letter. His expression changed. Adriana noticed immediately. "Caleb, what is it?" He slowly placed both papers side by side. The handwriting was not identical, but the way certain letters were formed was unmistakable. Someone had been helping Daniel preserve the truth long after he disappeared. Someone who was still connected to the company. Caleb looked at Adriana. There is another person who knows what happened. Before she could ask who, the boardroom doors opened. A woman stood there holding the missing page from Daniel Reeves's report. She looked at Adriana, then at Caleb, and whispered the one sentence that changed everything. I was the person who removed it 15 years ago. The woman standing at the boardroom door was someone Caleb Whitmore had never expected to see. She was older, carrying a worn leather folder against her chest, and her hands trembled slightly as she stepped into a room filled with people who had spent years protecting their own versions of the truth. My name is Evelyn Price, she said. I was Daniel Reeves's assistant when Bellamy Medical was just beginning. Adriana Bellamy slowly stood from her chair. She remembered Evelyn, not as a threat, not as an enemy. She remembered a young woman who used to organize Daniel's research notes and ask questions nobody else wanted to hear. Evelyn placed the missing page from Daniel's report on the table. I removed this 15 years ago because Daniel asked me to. Everyone turned toward her. The room had spent days searching for a missing document, but nobody had considered that someone had hidden it to protect the truth instead of destroying it. Evelyn explained that Daniel knew the report could be buried if the wrong people controlled the evidence. He asked her to keep the final page safe until someone trustworthy found the original file. But why wait 15 years? Why choose this moment? Evelyn looked at Caleb. Because Daniel believed people reveal who they are when they have nothing to gain. The words landed differently after everything Caleb had done. He had found information that could have protected his job. He had discovered a secret that could have given him power. Yet he chose responsibility over advantage. Adriana looked at the documents spread across the table. The final page contained what everyone had been searching for. The signatures, the approval records, the timeline. It showed that Daniel had warned the executive team about the risks. It showed that Richard Hale pushed forward with the decision despite those warnings. It showed that Adriana had not created the mistake, but she had allowed Daniel to carry the consequences alone. The room became silent. Not because the truth was surprising, because the truth was heavier than anyone expected. Adriana closed her eyes for a moment. She could still protect herself. She could explain that she was young. She could say she was trying to save thousands of jobs. She could point toward Richard Hale and let him carry everything. Instead, she did something nobody in the room expected. She admitted her part. Daniel was right, she said quietly. I told myself I was protecting the company, but I was protecting my fear. The board members looked at each other. The woman who built an empire was finally doing something more difficult than building it. She was accepting responsibility for the damage caused along the way. The next morning, Bellamy Medical released a public statement. It did not blame former employees. It did not hide behind legal language. Adriana personally acknowledged Daniel Reeves, apologized to his family, and announced a fund to support the engineers and employees whose careers had been affected by decisions made years earlier. But one person remained at the center of the conversation. Caleb, the man who had been accused of misusing confidential information, became the person employees thanked for bringing the truth forward. His suspension was removed. His position was restored. But when Adriana offered him a promotion, Caleb surprised her. I appreciate it, he said, but I do not need a different title to know my value. Adriana smiled because she finally understood the lesson Daniel had tried to teach everyone. Worth was never created by a position. It was revealed by choices. That evening, Caleb returned home and found Naomi waiting with her science project in her hands. She asked him if everything was fixed. Caleb looked at his daughter and smiled. Some things are fixed. Some things are healed. But as he placed Daniel's old photograph on the shelf beside his family pictures, Caleb noticed something he had never seen before. Written on the back was another name. A name Daniel had left behind for him to find. And Caleb realized the story he uncovered was not the only truth waiting to be discovered. 6 months later, Bellamy Tower no longer felt like the same building. The marble floors were still polished. The glass walls still reflected the city lights. The executive offices were still filled with people making decisions that affected thousands of lives. But something small had changed. People started learning the names of the people who kept the building running. The security team knew Caleb Whitmore. The executives knew Caleb Whitmore. Even the new employees who walked through the lobby every morning knew the man who once moved through the building like a shadow. Caleb never asked for attention. He still arrived before sunrise. He still checked every hallway carefully. He still fixed small problems before anyone noticed them. But now, When someone thanked him, he did not look surprised. One evening, Adriana Bellamy visited the maintenance office carrying a small wooden box. Caleb recognized it immediately. It was the same kind of box he had seen years ago in his father's home. Inside was Daniel Reeves's original employee badge, restored and framed. "I thought this belonged somewhere it could be remembered," Adriana said. Caleb ran his fingers across the frame, but did not pick it up immediately. For years, his father had been a man whose work disappeared the moment it was finished. Buildings stayed clean. Machines worked. Problems were solved. But nobody knew who made those things possible. Now his father's name was displayed in the Bellamy Medical History Center, not as a former employee who left quietly, but as someone who helped protect the truth. Adriana had changed too. She no longer avoided the old decisions that shaped her company. She created a program for employees who felt invisible, making sure ideas and warnings were heard no matter someone's position. She once believed leadership meant always having the answer. Caleb taught her that sometimes leadership meant admitting when you were wrong. The greatest surprise came when Caleb received a letter from Daniel Reeves's daughter. She had found him through the company records after the investigation became public. She wanted to thank him for giving her father the one thing he had wanted most, to be remembered honestly. Caleb read the letter at the kitchen table while Naomi worked on her latest school project beside him. She noticed the smile on his face and asked who had written it. Caleb handed her the letter. Naomi read quietly, then looked at her father. "You helped someone even before you knew him." Caleb smiled. "Sometimes people leave pieces of themselves behind. You just have to notice them." The next week, Caleb attended Naomi's science presentation. He sat in the front row, exactly where he promised he would be months earlier. When she finished explaining her project, she looked into the audience and found him smiling. It was a small moment. No cameras, no headlines, no boardroom applause, just a father keeping a promise to his daughter. Later that night, Caleb returned home and placed two photographs beside each other. One was of Naomi. The other was the old picture of Daniel and his father outside the maintenance building. Two generations of people who were once overlooked. Two stories that proved quiet choices could create lasting change. Caleb looked at the photographs for a long time before turning off the light. The door that opened that night had revealed a hidden truth, but it also revealed something more important. A person does not become valuable when the world finally notices them. The value was always there. The world simply needed time to see it. Thank you for watching until the end of the video.